The massive crystal structure appeared in Earth's solar system on a Tuesday morning, floating silently near the moon like a twisted mountain of glass and light. It was 3 times larger than any space station humanity had ever built, its surface covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The structure had done this exact same thing 47 times before in other star systems across the galaxy, and each time the result was the same. Dr. Peterson stood in the emergency meeting room at NASA headquarters, staring at the readings. That made no sense. The object had simply materialized out of nothing, violating every law of physics they understood. Within hours, it began broadcasting a message in perfect English, though somehow every species in the galaxy heard it in their own language when their turn came. Greetings, people of Earth. Your species has achieved faster-than-light travel and is now eligible for the test of survival. This examination has been administered by the architects for 3 million years to determine which species deserve membership in the galactic community. You will send 1 representative to face the trials within this structure. Success grants your species full citizenship among the stars. Failure results in permanent isolation of your world. You have 7 days to choose your champion. The message. Repeated every hour, always the same words, always the same calm tone. Around the world, governments went into emergency sessions. Military leaders demanded they send their best soldier. Scientists insisted on their most brilliant researcher. Religious leaders argued for their most spiritual individual. Everyone had an opinion about who should represent humanity's future among the stars. What they didn't know was that this exact argument had happened 47 times before on 47 different worlds, and every single species had made the same choice. They had sent their absolute best, their most perfect representative, believing that excellence would carry them through whatever trials awaited. The Cathara had been the first species to face the test. Millions of years ago, they were a warrior race 7 feet tall with natural armor plating and strength that could bend steel. Their champion could defeat 100 enemies in single combat and had never known defeat. He lasted exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes before the structure declared him a failure. The Vraxi came next, a species whose intelligence dwarfed most others in the galaxy. Their brains could process information faster than most computers, solve complex equations in seconds, and predict outcomes with stunning accuracy. Their champion was the greatest mind their civilization had ever produced. She broke down completely on the 3rd day and never recovered her sanity. One by one, species after species sent their champions. The spiritually enlightened Nethys sent their most balanced philosopher, a being who had achieved perfect harmony between mind and body. The technically advanced Solarans sent their greatest engineer, someone who could build impossible machines with their bare hands. The diplomatically gifted Centauri sent their most persuasive negotiator, capable of ending wars with words alone. All of them failed. Every single one. The test seemed designed to be impossible, a cosmic joke that condemned entire civilizations to remain trapped in their home systems. The lucky ones who survived the trials returned broken and traumatized, unable to speak of what they had experienced. Most never spoke again at all. The Galactic Council, made up of species who had all failed the test themselves, watched each new attempt with the same mixture of hope and resignation. They had long ago accepted that the test was simply beyond any species' ability to pass. The architects, whoever they had been, had apparently set a standard that no living being could meet, but they kept watching anyway, because hope was all they had left. When the crystal structure appeared near Earth, the Council's observers prepared for another routine failure. These humans seemed particularly unpromising. They were young as a spacefaring species, having only achieved faster-than-light travel a few months earlier. Their technology was crude, their society was fragmented, and they seemed to spend most of their time fighting among themselves. The debates on Earth raged for 6 days. Every expert had a different opinion about who should go. The military wanted to send Captain Reynolds, a decorated Special Forces officer who had survived impossible missions. The scientific community pushed for Dr. Chun, a physicist whose work had made faster-than-light travel possible. Religious leaders advocated for Sister Maria, A nun who had dedicated her life to helping others, but then something unprecedented happened. President Williams stood before the United Nations and made an announcement that shocked everyone listening. "We've been thinking about this wrong," she said, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's future. "Every other species sent their best person, and they all failed. Maybe the test isn't looking for the best. Maybe it's looking for something else entirely." The room erupted in protests and arguments, but she continued, speaking over the noise. "We're going to do something different. We're going to hold a lottery. Every adult human who volunteers will have their name entered, and we'll pick someone at random. If this test is designed to be impossible for the best among us, maybe it needs someone ordinary." The Galactic Council's observers couldn't believe what they were hearing. In 3 million years, no species had ever approached the test with anything less than their absolute finest representative. This was either brilliant or completely insane. The lottery was held the next day. Over 2 billion names were entered from every corner of Earth. Scientists, soldiers, teachers, farmers, doctors, mechanics, parents, students, anyone who was willing to potentially sacrifice their life for humanity's future. The drawing was broadcast worldwide, watched by every human alive. The name that came out was Marcus Reed. Marcus was a 42-year-old construction worker from Detroit. He had served 4 years in the Army, worked a dozen different jobs, survived a motorcycle accident that should have killed him, and raised 3 children alone after his wife died in a car crash. He wasn't the strongest human, the smartest, or the most skilled at anything in particular. He was just a man who had lived through the ordinary struggles of being human and kept going. When the call came, Marcus was fixing a leaky pipe in his apartment. He listened to the explanation, asked if his kids would be taken care of if he didn't come back, and then said yes. Not because he thought he could succeed where others had failed, but because someone had to try, and apparently that someone was him. The Galactic Council watched in bewilderment as this unremarkable human prepared for the most important test in cosmic history by packing a simple backpack with snacks, water, and a photo of his children. This wasn't how champions prepared. This wasn't how anyone prepared, but Marcus wasn't trying to be a champion. He was just trying to do his job, same as always. Marcus stood at the entrance to the crystal structure, looking up at the impossible geometry that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that made his eyes water. The shuttle that had brought him here from Earth was already heading back, leaving him alone with whatever waited inside. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and took a deep breath that tasted like metal and ozone. The entrance opened without any sound, revealing a corridor that stretched beyond what should have been possible, given the structure's exterior dimensions. The walls pulsed with soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus stepped inside and immediately felt the weight of countless eyes watching him from across the galaxy. The Galactic Council's observation chamber was packed with representatives from every known species, all of them focused on the screens showing Marcus's progress. Ambassador Thel of the Cathara shook his massive head in disbelief. His people's champion had been the greatest warrior in their history, trained from birth to face any challenge, and he had failed miserably. "This human shows no preparation at all," Thel rumbled to his colleagues. "He carries food and pictures like a child going to summer camp, not a representative facing the trials that will determine his species' fate." Dr. Vash of the Vraxi, her enlarged cranium gleaming under the chamber's lights, studied the readings with scientific precision. "His physiological responses are completely wrong for someone entering the trials. His heart rate is elevated but stable. His brain activity shows curiosity rather than the intense focus we would expect. Either he doesn't understand the gravity of the situation, or he's approaching it from a completely different perspective." High Priest Naller of the Nethys, his luminescent skin shifting through calming patterns, spoke with the measured tones of someone who had spent centuries in meditation. Perhaps his species simply lacks the intelligence to comprehend what they face. It would explain their casual approach to something so momentous. But as they watched, something strange began to happen. The first trial started automatically as soon as Marcus had walked 100 meters into the structure. The corridor around him disappeared, replaced by a chamber where gravity began to increase steadily every few minutes. This trial had broken champions who could lift tons with their bare hands, forcing them to crawl and eventually crushing them under their own body weight. Previous champions had approached this methodically, calculating their energy expenditure, and trying to reach the exit before the gravity became lethal. They had failed because they treated it like a problem to be solved rather than an ordeal to be endured. Marcus felt the gravity press down on him like a heavy blanket, making each step harder than the last. Instead of calculating or strategizing, he simply kept walking. When the weight became too much to walk normally, he adjusted his pace. When standing became difficult, he hunched over but kept moving. When even that became impossible, he crawled. The observers watched in growing amazement as the gravity reached levels that had crushed their champions, and Marcus was still moving forward. Not quickly, not gracefully, but with a stubborn persistence that defied explanation. His breathing was labored, his movements were clumsy, but he never stopped. "How is he still conscious?" Dr. Vash whispered, checking her instruments again. "The gravitational force should have rendered him unconscious minutes ago." Ambassador Thel leaned forward, his warrior's instincts recognizing something he hadn't expected. He's not fighting the gravity. Look at how he moves. He's accepting it as a condition of the environment and adapting to it rather than trying to overcome it. Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out a protein bar, eating it methodically while the gravity continued to increase. The action was so casual, so human, that several observers actually laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. Here was someone treating a cosmic trial like a difficult day at work. "I used to carry 100-pound bags of concrete up 3 flights of stairs," Marcus said to himself, his voice strained but steady. "This is just like that, except the bags keep getting heavier and I can't put them down." He thought about the time he had worked a construction job in Phoenix during the summer, when the temperature hit 115 degrees and they still had to finish pouring a foundation. He thought about carrying his daughter Amy to the hospital when she was 6 and had broken her leg, walking 3 miles because their car had broken down and no ambulance could reach them in the snowstorm. The gravity reached crushing levels, and Marcus was still moving, not because he was stronger than the other champions, but because he had learned something they hadn't. Sometimes you just had to endure, not because you were tough enough, but because stopping wasn't an option. "I've got 3 kids counting on me to come home," he muttered, dragging himself the last few feet to the exit. "And I've never broken a promise to my kids." The trial ended abruptly, gravity returning to normal as Marcus collapsed in the next corridor. He lay there for a few minutes, catching his breath, then stood up and kept walking as if nothing had happened. The observers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. "In 3 million years, High Priest Naller said slowly, no one has ever completed the first trial while maintaining casual conversation with themselves. His approach is completely wrong according to every model we have," Dr. Vash added, her scientific mind struggling to categorize what she had seen. "He should have failed. Every calculation says he should have failed." "But he didn't," Ambassador Thel observed, and for the first time in centuries there was something like hope in his voice. Marcus found himself in a simple room with a bed, a table, and what appeared to be a food dispenser. A voice spoke from the walls, the same emotionless tone that had delivered the original message to Earth. "You have completed the first trial. Rest and prepare for the second trial, which will begin in 1 hour." Marcus sat on the bed and pulled out the photo of his children, studying their faces while he ate another protein bar. Amy was 8 now, gap-toothed and grinning. Michael was 10, serious and thoughtful like his mother had been. Little Emma was only 5, still young enough to believe her dad could fix anything. "I wonder what they're doing right now," he said to the empty room. "Probably driving their babysitter crazy." The observers listened to this quiet moment of humanity, so different from the intense preparation rituals of previous champions. Other species representatives had used the rest periods for meditation, physical conditioning, or mental exercises designed to prepare them for the next challenge. Marcus was thinking about his kids, and wondering if he had remembered to leave enough money for groceries. The second trial was about to begin, and nobody, not even the ancient structure itself, had any idea what to expect from this strange human who treated cosmic trials like overtime shifts and impossible challenges like Tuesday afternoons. But they were all beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the test had been waiting for all along. The second trial began without warning as the room around Marcus dissolved into absolute darkness and silence. The chamber that materialized around him was designed to break minds through sensory deprivation, isolation, and the crushing weight of nothingness. Previous champions had been confined here for days, slowly losing their grip on reality as their minds turned inward and began to consume themselves. The Vraxi champion had lasted 4 days before beginning to claw at the walls, screaming about calculations that wouldn't balance. The Kithara warrior had made it to day 6 before he started seeing enemies that weren't there, fighting invisible battles until exhaustion claimed him. The spiritually enlightened Nethys philosopher had perhaps lasted the longest, maintaining meditation for 8 days before the isolation shattered his carefully constructed inner peace. Marcus sat in the darkness for the first few minutes, listening to the silence that seemed to press against his eardrums like a physical weight. Then he did something that had never happened in 3 million years of trials. He started talking to himself, but not in the way of someone losing their mind. "Well, this is new," he said aloud, his voice swallowed by the darkness, but somehow still reassuring to his own ears. "Reminds me of that time the power went out during the blizzard and we were stuck in the house for a week." The observers in the Galactic Council chamber exchanged puzzled glances. Other champions had either maintained stoic silence or gradually descended into incoherent rambling. This human was having what sounded like a normal conversation with himself. "You know what, kids?" Marcus continued, settling into a more comfortable position on the floor. "Your old man once spent 3 days in a cave when he was in the army. Training exercise gone wrong, got separated from my unit. Had to wait for extraction in a space smaller than our bathroom, with nothing but emergency rations and my own thoughts for company." Dr. Vash studied her instruments with growing confusion. "His neural patterns are not showing the expected deterioration. In fact, they're remarkably stable for someone in complete sensory isolation." Marcus pulled out another protein bar and ate it slowly, savoring the taste and texture in the featureless void. "The trick," he said, apparently addressing the darkness itself, "is to remember that being alone doesn't mean being lonely. Sometimes being alone is when you figure out who you really are." He began telling stories to pass the time, recounting adventures from his childhood, funny things his kids had done, memories of his wife and the life they had built together before cancer took her away. The stories weren't random rambling, but carefully chosen recollections that painted a picture of a life fully lived, with all its joys and sorrows. "Amy asked me last week why Mommy had to die," Marcus said on the second day, his voice steady in the darkness. "I told her the same thing my dad told me when my mom passed. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. And it's not because they deserve it or because the universe is cruel. It's just because life is complicated and messy and beautiful all at the same time." The observers found themselves leaning forward, drawn into these glimpses of human experience that were so different from their own cultural approaches to loss and meaning. Ambassador Thel, whose warrior culture viewed death as either glorious victory or shameful defeat, struggled to understand how someone could speak of loss without anger or bitterness. High Priest Naller, whose people sought transcendence through the elimination of emotional attachment, was puzzled by this human's ability to find peace while fully embracing the pain of loss. "He speaks of suffering as if it were a teacher rather than an enemy," Naller murmured to his colleagues. On the third day, Marcus started having full conversations with imaginary people, but these weren't the hallucinations of a breaking mind. He was talking to his children, his deceased wife, his old army buddies, having the kinds of conversations he might have at home during quiet moments. "You know what your problem is?" he said to the darkness, apparently addressing the trial itself. "You think being alone is the worst thing that can happen to a person. But sometimes being alone is when you get to know yourself. Sometimes it's when you realize that you're pretty good company." He told jokes to himself and laughed at his own punchlines. He recited bedtime stories he used to tell his kids, complete with different voices for all the characters. He even argued with himself about sports scores and whether the Detroit Lions would ever win a championship. The thing about loneliness, Marcus explained to his unseen audience on day 5, is that it's not really about being alone, it's about feeling disconnected from the things that matter. But I've got my kids in here with me, he tapped his temple. And my wife and my memories and all the people who made me who I am. How can I be lonely when I'm carrying all of them around with me? The trial was designed to break minds that feared isolation. But Marcus had learned to find peace in solitude during those long nights after his wife's death, when the children were asleep and he had only his thoughts for company. He had discovered that his own mind, when treated with kindness and respect, could be a source of comfort rather than torment. On day 7, something unprecedented happened. The structure itself began to speak, its voice carrying a note of confusion that had never been present before. "Why are you not broken?" it asked. Marcus looked up into the darkness, unsurprised by the question. Broken how? Previous champions have suffered psychological collapse by this point. Their minds fragment under the weight of isolation. "You appear to be enjoying yourself." Marcus laughed, a sound so warm and genuine that several observers felt their own spirits lift despite the seriousness of the situation. "Enjoying myself? I wouldn't go that far. But this isn't torture for me. This is just quiet time." "Explain." "Look, after my wife died, I spent a lot of nights sitting up alone, just thinking. At first it hurt like hell, but eventually I realized something. The quiet isn't empty if you fill it with the right things. And the right things aren't distractions. From your thoughts, they're your thoughts, just the good ones." The structure was silent for a long moment, processing this response that fit none of its parameters for expected behavior. "I miss my kids," Marcus continued conversationally. "And I'm worried about them. But missing someone isn't the same as being lonely, and worrying about people is just another way of loving them. You can't break someone with solitude when they've learned to be friends with their own mind." The darkness around him began to shift and change, preparing for the next phase of the trial. Marcus stood up, stretched muscles that were stiff from sitting, and shouldered his backpack. "Thanks for the break," he said to the structure. "First time I've had a proper rest in years. What's next?" The observers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. In 3 million years, no one had ever emerged from the isolation trial refreshed and grateful. No one had ever thanked the structure for the experience. Dr. Vash spoke for all of them when she said, "I believe we are witnessing something that will require us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the nature of consciousness, resilience, and the trials themselves." But Marcus wasn't thinking about consciousness or resilience. He was thinking about his kids and wondering what the next challenge would bring, approaching it with the same calm acceptance he brought to everything else in his life. The third trial materialized around Marcus as a series of impossible moral dilemmas, each one designed to paralyze ethical beings with choices that had no right answers. The chamber filled with holographic scenarios that felt completely real, forcing him to make decisions where every option resulted in suffering and death. The first scenario appeared before him with vivid clarity. A runaway train was heading toward 5 people tied to the tracks. He could pull a lever to divert it to another track, but that track had 1 person tied to it. Save 5 lives by actively causing 1 death, or let 5 people die through inaction? Previous champions had been crushed by these dilemmas. The Nethys philosopher had spent days agonizing over the first scenario, unable to act because both choices violated his core beliefs about the sanctity of life. The Vraxi scientist had tried to calculate the optimal outcome using complex ethical algorithms, eventually suffering a complete mental breakdown when the math provided no clear answer. Marcus looked at the scenario for exactly 30 seconds, pulled the lever to save 5 lives, and moved on to the next dilemma. The observers watched in shock as he continued this pattern, making choice after choice with a speed that seemed almost callous. Save a busload of children or a hospital full of patients? He chose the children. Prevent a war that would kill thousands or allow a genocide that would kill hundreds? He he prevented the war. Sacrifice one innocent person to save a city or let the city burn, he saved the city. How are you making these decisions so quickly? The structure asked, its voice carrying that same note of confusion that had appeared during the isolation. Trial, same way I make every decision, Marcus replied, watching the next scenario load. I pick the option I can live with and move on, but these scenarios have no correct answers. Every choice results in moral compromise. Marcus paused in his movement toward the next dilemma, turning to address the empty air where the structure's voice seemed to originate. That's the point, isn't it? You're not testing for the right answer because there isn't one. You're testing to see if someone can make hard choices when everything is wrong. The Galactic Council observers leaned forward, sensing something significant in this exchange. Dr. Vash's instruments showed that Marcus's stress levels had actually decreased. Since the moral trials began, as if making difficult decisions was somehow easier for him than facing uncertainty. You display no anguish over these choices, the structure observed. Previous champions have been tormented by the weight of their decisions. Oh, I'm not happy about any of this, Marcus said, his voice carrying a weariness that spoke of experience. With difficult choices, but anguish doesn't change anything. I learned that when the doctors told me my wife needed surgery that might save her life or might kill her, and I had to sign the papers anyway because doing nothing was definitely going to kill her. He continued through the scenarios, each decision made with the same calm efficiency. The pattern became clear to the observers. He wasn't choosing based on abstract ethical principles or complex calculations. He was choosing based on something much simpler and more practical. Ambassador Thel rumbled his confusion to his colleagues. His choices follow no recognizable moral framework that our philosophers have catalogued, yet they are consistent in a way that suggests underlying principles. He's not trying to avoid moral compromise, High Priest Naller realized with sudden clarity. He's accepting that moral compromise is inevitable and choosing the option that minimizes harm while remaining actionable. The fourth trial began without transition, and this was where every previous champion had been completely broken. The chamber filled with hyper-realistic simulations of their homeworlds being destroyed in excruciating detail. They were forced to watch as everyone they loved died horrible deaths while being completely powerless to intervene. The Cathara warrior had screamed for 72 hours straight before his mind snapped. The Vraxi scientist had tried to analyze the simulations for logical flaws and gradually realized they were emotionally accurate even if not literally real, which somehow made them worse. Champions who survived the experience never recovered, spending the rest of their lives catatonic or completely mad. Marcus watched as Earth burned. He saw his children's faces in the flames, heard their voices calling for him as cities crumbled and humanity was reduced to ash. He stood there for hours, tears streaming down his face, experiencing every parent's worst nightmare in perfect detail, but he didn't break. He didn't scream or collapse or beg for it to stop. He watched it all, grieving openly but remaining fundamentally intact. And then he did something that stunned every observer in the galaxy. He laughed, not the laugh of madness or hysteria, but the laugh of someone who had just understood a cosmic joke. It was warm and sad and somehow defiant all at once. You really don't understand us at all, do you? He said to the structure, wiping tears from his eyes while still chuckling. You think showing me the worst thing that could happen is going to break me. But humans live with that knowledge every day. The simulations flickered as if the structure itself was confused by this response. Every time I kiss my kids goodnight, I know it might be the last time, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the tears. Every time I say goodbye to someone, I know they might not come home. We don't survive by pretending bad things won't happen. We survive by loving people. Anyway, how do you function with such awareness of mortality? The structure asked, and for the first time its voice carried something like genuine curiosity rather than clinical observation. Same way you function knowing the heat death of the universe is coming eventually, Marcus replied. You focus on what matters right now. You do what you can while you can. And when bad things happen, you grieve, you heal, and you keep going. The structure was silent for a long moment, and the observers could sense something fundamental shifting in its ancient programming. You are not motivated by the prevention of loss, it finally said. You are motivated by the acceptance of loss as inevitable and the choice to find meaning despite it. Now you're getting it, Marcus said. Look, I've already lost the most important person in my world. My wife died, and it nearly killed me too. But I had 3 kids who needed their dad to keep going, so I learned how to live with a broken heart. You can't threaten someone with loss when they've already learned that losing people doesn't mean you stop loving them. The 5th and final trial materialized around him, a combination of all the previous elements with added time pressure and complexity. Previous champions had to complete increasingly difficult tasks while their homeworlds were supposedly under attack. Mounting pressure until they made fatal errors, Marcus approached it completely differently. Instead of trying to excel at everything, he did something revolutionary. He prioritized. He ignored tasks he couldn't complete efficiently and focused on ones he could. When forced to choose between personal achievement and collective benefit, he chose collective benefit every single time. You're not trying to achieve perfection, the structure observed as Marcus worked steadily through the challenges. Perfection is for people who have time to waste, Marcus replied, his hands busy with a task that required delicate coordination while his mind tracked 3 other urgent problems. I'm trying to get the job done. As the final trial concluded, the crystalline structure began to change for the first time in 3 million years. Its patterns shifted and realigned, suggesting deep processing and perhaps even something like surprise. The observers held their breath, knowing they were witnessing either humanity's failure or something unprecedented in galactic history. Marcus stood in the center of the changing chamber, tired but unbroken, waiting to see what judgment the ancient architects had programmed into their impossible test. The crystalline structure's patterns stabilized into something entirely new, and when the voice returned, it carried a weight and complexity that suggested the awakening of something that had been dormant for eons. The ancient consciousness behind the trials was fully active for the first time since its creators had transcended physical existence. In 3 million years and 47 species, you are the first to complete all trials successfully, the voice said, and Marcus could hear something like wonder in its tone. But you have succeeded in a way we never anticipated or programmed for. Marcus sat down on the floor, exhausted but oddly peaceful. The constant pressure of the trials had lifted, leaving behind a strange calm that reminded him of the moments after his wife had finally passed, when the long struggle was over and only acceptance remained. What exactly was this whole thing supposed to prove? He asked, pulling out his water bottle and taking a long drink. We were tasked by our creators, the architects, to identify species worthy of joining the galactic community. We saw perfection, beings who could overcome any challenge, solve any problem, endure any hardship without breaking. We believed that only perfect beings could handle the responsibilities that come with cosmic citizenship. Marcus nodded slowly, thinking about the champions who had come before him. But you found perfect beings. Those other champions were incredible. Stronger than me, smarter than me, more disciplined in every way that matters. Yes, the structure agreed, and there was something like sadness in its ancient voice. And they all failed because they were perfect. They had never learned to fail, to adapt, to continue despite imperfection. When faced with impossible situations, they broke because their entire existence was built on the assumption that there was always a correct solution, always a way to achieve the ideal outcome. The Galactic Council observers listened in stunned silence as the structure continued its analysis. 3 million years of failure suddenly made sense, but the implications were staggering. Your species evolved on what we classify as a death world, the structure explained. A planet that attempted to kill you through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, predators, and countless other methods. You survived not through superior strength or intelligence, but through adaptation and resilience. Marcus thought about Earth's history, the countless near extinctions and recoveries that had shaped humanity. We got good at surviving because we had to. Earth never gave us the option of being perfect. Exactly. You learn to find meaning in struggle, to create hope in hopeless situations, to continue functioning when everything was wrong. Most remarkably, you learn to laugh at the absurdity of existence itself. These are not the traits we were programmed to recognize as valuable, but they are the traits the galaxy actually needs. The structure paused, and Marcus could sense vast computational processes working through implications and possibilities. Around the galaxy, the observation chambers fell silent as species after species realized what this meant for their own failed attempts. We understand now that our creators made an error in their programming, the structure continued. They designed us to test for the wrong qualities. The galaxy doesn't need perfect beings who have never known failure. It needs beings who can fail and try again, who can face the impossible and find a way forward anyway. Dr. Vash spoke into the stunned silence of the council chamber. It's testing for resilience rather than excellence, for adaptation rather than optimization, for the ability to continue functioning when systems break down rather than the ability to prevent systems from breaking down in the first place. Ambassador Thell's massive frame shook as understanding dawned. Our warrior who had never known defeat was unprepared for defeat when it came. Their human, who had known many defeats, was prepared to continue fighting through defeat. High Priest. Naller's luminescent skin flickered through patterns of amazement. We sought transcendence through the elimination of suffering. They found transcendence through the acceptance of suffering as part of existence. Back in the structure, Marcus was having his own moment of understanding. So all those other species, the ones sitting in their home systems, they could actually pass this test now? Not this test, the structure replied. We are redesigning the trials entirely. Instead of testing for perfection, we will test for the qualities you have demonstrated. The ability to adapt, to persist, to find meaning in struggle, to make imperfect decisions and live with the consequences. The implications rippled through the galactic community like a shockwave. Species that had accepted their failure as permanent suddenly saw hope for redemption. The failed registry, that monument to cosmic inadequacy, might finally become obsolete. There's something else, the structure added, and Marcus detected a note of what might have been embarrassment in its voice. We have been learning from your responses throughout the trials. Your approach to survival, your methods of finding meaning and maintaining hope. These are skills that other species will need to learn. Marcus stood up, shouldering his backpack and looking around the chamber that had been his home for what felt like weeks. So what happens now? Now, humanity is granted full membership in the Galactic Council with all associated rights and privileges. But more than that, we formally request that your species serve as teachers and guides for others who will retake the modified trials. The galaxy needs to learn what you have always known. And what's that? That survival isn't about being strong enough to never fall down. It's about being stubborn enough to keep getting back up. That wisdom isn't about having all the answers, but about being willing to act even when you don't. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what needs doing despite the fear. Marcus walked toward the exit that had appeared in the chamber wall, then paused and turned back. Does this mean I can go home now? My kids are probably wondering where their old man went. Yes, the structure replied, and for the first time in 3 million years, there was warmth in its ancient voice. Welcome to the cosmos, humanity. Try not to break anything important, Marcus chuckled as he headed for the exit. Break it? We're more likely to fix it with duct tape and hope for the best. The structure pulsed once, brightly, and across the galaxy a message went out to every species in the failed registry. The test of survival has been fundamentally redesigned. New trials will begin within one standard cycle. We are no longer seeking perfection. We are seeking the strength to be imperfect and continue anyway. Marcus emerged from the crystal structure to find a shuttle waiting to take him home. As Earth grew larger in the viewport, he thought about everything that had happened and everything That would change. Humanity hadn't just passed an impossible test, they had revolutionized it completely. He returned to Earth as humanity's first galactic citizen, went back to his construction job, and told his kids about his adventure over dinner. Amy wanted to know if there were alien princesses. Michael asked about the technology. Emma just wanted to make sure he wasn't going away again. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus promised, and meant it completely. The galaxy would never be the same. But then again, neither would the test that had defined it for 3 million years. Sometimes the most profound changes came not from those who sought to transcend their limitations, but from those who had learned to embrace them and keep going. Anyway, after all, that's what humans did best.